Hello, I'm Lou Haney. This is my show at Hillier here in DC. The title of the show is Retreat, and I titled it that way specifically because I was thinking about both the idea of retreat as a way of getting away from something that feels sort of dangerous, but also as a vacation. So I like words that have that kind of like play where it can mean one thing in one situation, but also another thing in another situation. So these three paintings are all from inspired by a bunker that I found online. As we sort of sit on our phones and scroll, you kind of find some really interesting things. And so this popped up in my algorithm. And what I love about it is it's a bunker that was built in the late 70s. And it was built by this millionaire, the guy that owned Avon Cosmetics. And it's under the streets of Las Vegas. So he had all the money he wanted, supposedly, and needed to have this like retreat, this place of escape. And it's a 50s ranch house, which I find the juxtaposition between maybe being in the late 70s, being a millionaire, and it's a very pedestrian space. It's a space that felt very much like a middle class, achievable kind of space. But I loved it because it sort of revealed what his place, or whoever he was building this with or for, their place of safety. And so I'm kind of thinking about like, okay, what would his bunker be like, but also what might my bunker be like? Or, I don't have one yet, but what would that look like? So this one, you can see this is sort of the outdoor space. And so it's got a pool. Yes, I would totally want a pool. I was reading about it during my research, and supposedly he hired sort of scenic painters to depict landscapes from all of the vacation homes he owned. So I guess he had a mountain house and a beach house, which again, why is this bunker in Las Vegas? It feels precarious to put it in the desert, but that's me. But it's also like not the most glamorous of pools. It's kind of like a plastic insert. You've got the kind of Disney World fake rocks going on. Here you have a pool house, and this would be like the main part. And up here you can kind of see that this is a room. It's not a true exterior. So we have the kind of lighting, the plugs going in for the lights, the vent. And I think this is actually supposed to be some kind of barbecue, which I find the idea of an open flame in the underground bunker to possibly be problematic, but that's just me. So I guess you really would need some kind of venting going on. And then as I was painting, I was trying to think about, I like to add things into the spaces, like on the tables and things like that. And so the drink that's right here, I have another drink, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but those kind of representing. And then I was also thinking about what kind of art would you have if you had a bunker, if you had a space that perhaps only your family or your closest friends would ever see, right? And so I put in some artwork that was from, that is stolen or lost. So it's famous artwork, but we don't know where it is in the world. So maybe all of like the Isabella Gardner artwork is like in somebody's bunker somewhere, right? So but that happened after this was built. So I didn't put any of that artwork in there because I knew so this might be from World War II, because there's still a lot of stuff that might have been bombed or is still under somebody's bed. We're in somebody's bunker. And so this is a painting by Matisse, and this is a Van Gogh. And I can't remember what this is over here, but it might be a Gustav Klimt, but I'm not exactly sure. So I was kind of playing around. This is also acrylic on Yupo, and I really wanted it to have that kind of immersive scale to kind of feel like you could kind of walk in and out of, and that's why we kind of lowered it a little bit so it felt sort of human-sized and a place to kind of retreat to, a space that you could be in. We can talk about this one. So this is also from that series, but it's from the inside, all of it's inside, but from the out looking onto the view. And one thing I loved about it is, like, again, a very modest middle-class type of kitchen, one that felt really familiar to me. I can't exactly remember what the sink at my grandmother's house looked like, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't far from this. And there was actually, I wanted there to be like 2 dishwashers in the space. I also find it really funny that there's nothing on the counters. Like, I've never lived in a house where you didn't even have like soap or a brush or anything like that. So it's just that kind of like empty minimalist counter, and then we have the curtains, and I chose this view. So it's actually from a postcard, a vintage postcard that I found of Grandfather Mountain in Western North Carolina. And I was trying to think about what were some views that I would want if I were stuck underground, and having the view of the mountains would be definitely part of that. So it is sort of a digital collage, a juxtaposition between the 2 spaces. So these are 2 a little different from most of the work that's in the exhibition. This is a vintage crewel embroidery kit that I found. I did all of the embroidery, and this is something that I've done for many years. So I have an extensive collection of vintage crewel embroidery pillows. I started doing them in like 2003, and it's one of those kinds of like practices that sort of calms me down. It is this, and just in this moment where everything feels very chaotic, it is 2025, this idea of the serenity prayer is something that I have to like, almost like a mantra about, like, all right, here's what I can control, here's what I can't control. These are the things that I can get like upset about, and I think these paintings are a way of like emotionally retreating, because in order to do them, not necessarily the embroidery, but the paintings, you really have to focus because there is so many details. And so I have to I can't think about everything else that's going on. I have to just be in the present making the paintings. And so I wanted to include that because I do think that might be something that's maybe on a pillow or hanging somewhere in the bunker. Like, it felt like of the same era, and the colors all made sense. This is actually a watercolor, and actually it's mixed media because it's a watercolor and then it's got kind of a print on behind. And it's called Branchlands After Hurricane Helene. So Hurricane Helene hit in September 2024. This painting was at my friend's gallery in Asheville, in the Riverviews Art District. And so she knew the water was coming. She tried really hard to get all of the artwork up into the 2nd floor, which was in a high 2nd floor. Unfortunately, the water went to about 3 or 4 feet on the 2nd floor, and these paintings survived only because they were on top of a sofa. She just sort of had put them up there, and that's one of the few places the water didn't get to. So there was probably about 500 artworks in the gallery of hers, her father's, and then what they were showing in the gallery, and probably only 20 survived. And there's actually, I'm just gonna kind of pull this off. Okay, and we can kind of look. But here you can see there's a line from the floodwaters. And the painting is a little sort of not as sharp right in here, but I love this idea of the artwork kind of reacting and surviving its environment. And so because this is about this kind of sense of escape and of things coming at us that we cannot control, this felt conceptually like it fit with the exhibition. All right, so these two are sort of related to this body of work. They're coming from vintage sources. They're digital collages where this is from an ad where it was like, get the directions to make your own curtains. And I just loved sort of how over the top and girly and frilly the curtains were. I played around with this pattern, which I really enjoyed painting. And I actually cut a little stencil and made the pattern going in here. I was thinking again about this idea of portals and like, what would you want your view to be, not what's actually there. And so this is from a photograph from my camera roll where I was at a place in Virginia that had tulips, and we went and sort of spent the afternoon. It was just sort of a beautiful thing, but color-wise and also like sentiment, my own personal, like, I'd like to look at that view for a long time. And so if I get to choose, this is a place that I would choose. A couple of people asked me last night during the opening about painting around the edges. And so that's something that I do very much on purpose, because I'm thinking about how the paintings can sort of start to bleed off of the panel, off of the canvas. And I love the idea of maybe one day this pattern, almost like an evasive kudzu or honeysuckle or wisteria, how it can kind of like escape the bounds of this and kind of start to grow onto the wall. And so that's a very much a choice of thinking about these paintings kind of moving off of there. And then finally, we can also do that one, but here we have Virginia Swan, and this is named from a quote from John Adams, and let me see if I can do it off the top of my head. John Adams said about Virginia that even in Virginia, even the geese are called swans. So when I painted that in there, I was thinking about, you know, this sort of dig at sort of the hubris of Virginians, of a place of where I live. I'm not from there, but, you know, it's pretty great. And so this is, parts of it are from a vintage source that I found. And I'm kind of moving things around. I have lots of books, so a lot of times I'll kind of get the general idea from something, and then I'll start kind of like taking one thing out, adding another. So I love this idea of this formal garden. Again, thinking about if you could choose, what would you want to be in this exterior? So this is from one thing, and I have Photoshop, so I can just kind of like take this out, add this. And then I also like to kind of add in more objects or different things. This is from a vintage ad for, I think, Canada Dry. And so I have a big version of it, and so I wanted to add that in. I love this idea of the TV. I think maybe they were trying to sell us TVs. I think that was, you know, the impetus for this image. But one thing that I find interesting is that there are no plugs, right? And so somehow this thing is existing in the middle of the room, which, you know, especially back then, this would have been a really expensive piece of equipment that you wouldn't just put on the floor in the middle of the room. And again, I have painted cars before, and I just thought it'd be fun to paint a yellow Corvette. Isn't that a Corvette? Come tell me. I think it is. Right there? Okay. The car expert says it's a Corvette. Yeah. But again, kind of playing around with pillows, objects, finding these patterns that then could maybe bleed into the exterior, into the sort of landscape. The idea of this kind of snake plant, you can almost imagine that it's growing and like could start to take things over. I've come from a world where a lot of times driving down the highway, you'll see old houses and vines and things kind of growing up and in them. And it's spooky, but it's always sort of visually compelling. So there's kind of that element of the invasive, like nature taking back over in a way that I think is interesting. So this is, again, this is painted on plexiglass. So part of the painting's here on the front and then part of it's on the back. And what I like about it is that I usually leave the negative space of these paintings open, and that way it can kind of meld with the environment that you can find it in. So wherever you hang it, the color of that is also going to be the color of the background. So, and I also love how it has its own shadow. So it is this sort of flat thing, but also when you see it in a room and it gets lit, it has that kind of three-dimensionality of that as well. And so this is from a vintage ad. I love painting liquids. I love painting metal. I love painting glass. And so like the act of it is really interesting, but also, thinking about putting drinks into the spaces. There's never really any people, and I do that on purpose because I want it to be this kind of, somebody last night called it dystopian. There is, especially with the bunker paintings, very dystopian, like what would it look like, like a time capsule. No one's been in, nothing's moved, but yet there's still like a drink or maybe there's an ashtray or something like that, which to me feels very much of its time.